What if I told you that the wealth you are chasing is not hiding in the economy, your job, or your luck, but is waiting for one inner command from you to activate it? What if the life of wealth you dream about is not waiting in the future, but waiting in your mind right now? In this video, you will discover the exact inner shift that turns desire into reality, uncertainty into confidence, and imagination into unstoppable financial momentum. Watch closely, because one decision in the next few minutes can realign your thinking with the flow of abundance. This day you do not become rich and then learn how to think like a wealthy person. You adopt the mindset first, and the wealth follows as a consequence. This is where most people reverse the order and unknowingly delay their own success. They wait for proof before they give themselves permission to believe. But transformation never works that way. Identity always comes before evidence. The moment you internally assume the role of a person who thrives, who expects success, who naturally attracts opportunity, your behavior, decisions, and perspective begin to reorganize in alignment with that identity. And once that internal shift occurs, the external world has no option but to follow. Every material outcome in your life is an extension of who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, your mind will unconsciously seek proof to validate that story. If you see yourself as someone who prospers, your attention automatically shifts toward solutions, pathways, and open doors. This is not wishful thinking. This is cause and effect operating through awareness. When you assume abundance as your natural state, you stop reacting to life as if success is rare or fragile. You move with the quiet confidence of someone who expects results, and expectation is a powerful creative force. Assumption is more than positive thinking. It is a decision about identity that becomes your internal reference point. It determines what feels normal to you. When wealth feels unusual, it remains distant. When wealth feels natural, it becomes familiar, and what is familiar is accessible. This is why sudden success often disappears for those who do not internally match it. Their external life outpaces their internal self-concept, and the imbalance corrects itself by pulling the results back down. But when your internal assumption is already aligned with abundance, expansion feels stable, deserved, and sustainable. Your mind is constantly asking one defining question: who am I right now? And your life answers accordingly. If your internal answer is hesitant, limited, or fearful, your circumstances will echo that frequency. If your answer is certain, expansive, and self-assured, your environment reorganizes to reflect that certainty. This is why two people can be given the same opportunity and produce completely different outcomes. One assumes success as natural. The other assumes struggle as normal. Assumption, not circumstance, determines the result. When you internally take on the identity of wealth, you stop negotiating with limitation. You no longer see money as something you chase, but as something that responds to your state of being. You begin to move differently. You speak differently. You tolerate less chaos. You choose with clarity. You recognize value faster. You attract higher caliber conversations. You feel out of place in environments that once felt normal, not because you became arrogant, but because your internal standard rose. This assumption is also what dissolves fear. Fear survives only when you see yourself as vulnerable to loss. But when your identity is rooted in abundance, setbacks lose their power to intimidate. You no longer interpret obstacles as proof of failure, but as temporary redirections within an unstoppable trajectory. Confidence then stops being something you force and becomes something you embody. At first, your assumption may feel artificial. That is natural. You are interrupting years, sometimes decades, of habitual self-definition. But repetition is the law of permanence. The more often you return to your chosen identity, the more it replaces the old one. Eventually, the new assumption feels effortless. That is when reality begins shifting rapidly, because resistance has lost its foundation. The world does not respond to what you want. It responds to who you are being. Desire without identity creates tension. Identity without tension creates momentum. When you assume the state of the successful, you stop trying to become it. You start expressing it. And expression is magnetic. It pulls resources, people, ideas, and timing into alignment with astonishing precision. This is why waiting for permission is the greatest delay. Waiting for approval, waiting for luck, waiting for a perfect condition. Assumption requires none of that. It only requires decision. The decision that from this moment forward, you no longer see yourself as someone attempting to rise, but as someone who already stands on higher ground and is simply allowing the scenery to catch up. Wealth does not arrive to confirm your belief. Belief arrives to authorize your wealth. The moment you internally accept that abundance is your standard rather than your exception, the rules change. You stop asking if it is possible and start asking how it will express itself. You stop questioning if you deserve it and start structuring your life to hold it. When assumption becomes unwavering, effort becomes focused, not frantic. You are no longer pushing against doubt. You are moving from certainty. And certainty is the soil where opportunity grows fastest. This is the quiet secret behind every major leap, every financial breakthrough, every stable rise that looks effortless from the outside. It always starts with an invisible shift that later becomes an undeniable result. Assume first, let reality follow. It always does. Every silent statement you make about money is a command. That single truth, once fully understood, changes everything. You may believe your bank balance is shaped by effort, timing, or luck, but the deeper force at work is the unseen dialogue unfolding in your mind every day. The words you silently repeat about your worth, your income, your opportunities, and your limits quietly become instructions that reality follows with unwavering accuracy. Long before a result appears in your hands, it has already been stamped into your consciousness through repetition. Your inner conversations are not harmless background noise. They are active blueprints. If your mind keeps rehearsing struggle, money is hard to get, I never have enough, wealth is for other people, you are not merely observing difficulty, you are authorizing it. You are feeding the subconscious a steady diet of limitation, and the subconscious has one job: to execute whatever it accepts as true. It does not debate your instructions. It does not question your history. It simply builds the world to match your dominant assumptions. On the other hand, when your inner world begins to speak in certainty, money moves toward me easily. Opportunities seek me out. I am always supported financially. Something equally precise begins to happen. You start to notice different doors. You meet different people. You make bolder decisions without fear. Opportunity does not suddenly appear because the world changed. It appears because your awareness changed. You stopped tuning into lack and started tuning into abundance, and reality adjusted its signal to match yours. Most people unknowingly sabotage themselves all day long through their self-talk. They say they want wealth, yet internally they argue for limitation. They affirm success publicly, but deny it privately. They dream of freedom, but rehearse failure in silence. This inner contradiction creates delay, confusion, and frustration. The outer world reflects the conflict faithfully. What you agree with internally is what you experience externally. Agreement is power. It is not enough to hope for wealth. Hope implies distance. It keeps abundance safely in the future, always out of reach. What reshapes destiny is assumption. When you assume something is already true, your behavior subtly reorganizes without force. You begin to walk, speak, choose, and expect differently. You stop bracing for failure and start moving with quiet authority. This shift is not loud. It is calm. It is decisive. And it is unstoppable. Speaking wealth internally before demanding it externally is the bridge between desire and possession. When your inner voice becomes aligned with prosperity, you no longer beg the world for validation. You become a collaborator with it. You stop asking, will it happen for me? And you start moving as someone who knows it must. That knowing is magnetic. People can feel it. Circumstances respond to it. Timing bends to meet it. This is why forced positivity does not work. Empty affirmations without inner agreement collapse under pressure. The subconscious rejects what feels fake. True inner speech feels natural, calm, and rooted in identity. It is not shouted, it is assumed. You do not need to convince yourself that you are abundant. You decide it and speak from that position inwardly until it becomes familiar. Familiarity hardens into belief. Belief solidifies into expectation. Expectation becomes experience. Observe your private language for one full day and you will discover why certain financial patterns keep repeating. Do you mentally apologize for wanting more? Do you justify limitation as realism? Do you envy others while disqualifying yourself in the same breath? These habits feel subtle, but they are potent. They are instructions written in invisible ink that life reads clearly. The moment you take command of your inner conversation, power shifts back into your hands. You stop reacting to conditions and start generating them. Even before your circumstances change, your posture changes. You carry yourself differently. You negotiate differently. You think long-term instead of survival-based. Wealth begins as a tone of thought long before it becomes a number in an account. Critically, this inner work does not require struggle. It requires consistency. You do not wrestle with the old voice, you replace it. Each time the old scarcity script appears, you calmly overwrite it with a wealth-aligned assumption, not with panic, with certainty. No emotional battle is needed. The repetition alone rewires the pattern. Over time, the new voice becomes automatic, and the old one fades from authority. When your inner conversation is disciplined, your outer world becomes disciplined in responding. Money flows more predictably. Opportunities feel less random. You begin to sense alignment instead of chaos. Even setbacks carry clarity rather than despair. You no longer interpret delay as rejection. You interpret it as timing adjusting to deeper movement. This is the quiet confidence of people who have learned the real mechanism of wealth. They do not chase. They do not beg. They do not panic. They assume. They speak internally from the end, not from the lack. And the world is compelled, not emotionally, not morally, but structurally, to reflect that assumption back to them in the form of results. The shift begins the instant you decide that your inner voice is no longer a passive commentator, but an active architect. From that moment forward, every thought about money carries weight. Every silent sentence has direction. Every repeated belief becomes a path. Speak wealth internally before you demand it externally. Let your mind become the place where riches are normal, expected, and unquestioned. When that becomes your internal standard, reality will quietly, steadily, and inevitably rise to meet it. Your imagination is not a playground for idle thoughts. It is the command center where reality is drafted before it ever appears. Everything that exists in your life right now once existed as an unseen assumption, a mental picture, a silent expectation. The world you experience is not random. It is the physical mirror of the images you repeatedly impress upon your inner world. When you understand this, you stop treating imagination as fantasy and begin using it as a strategic instrument of creation. Most people imagine unconsciously. They replay fears, rehearse limitations, visualize failure without realizing they are giving those images creative authority. The mind does not discriminate between what is real and what is imagined. When emotion and repetition are involved, it simply accepts what is impressed upon it as truth and organizes behavior, perception, decisions, and opportunities to confirm that truth. This is why a person who constantly imagines struggle keeps encountering struggle, even when opportunity stands right in front of them. Now reverse that process. When you deliberately, vividly, and repeatedly experience wealth in the mind, not as a wish, not as a distant hope, but as a present fact, you are issuing new instructions to the deepest level of consciousness. You are not pretending. You are not fantasizing. You are selecting a state of being and occupying it internally before it hardens into form externally. The moment the mind accepts an image as real, it begins rearranging perception, behavior, and circumstance to match it. Vividness is crucial. A vague wish produces vague results, but a detailed inner experience where you see, feel, hear, and emotionally occupy the reality of wealth creates a powerful imprint. When you imagine holding financial freedom with sensory depth, you are not merely thinking about money. You are training your nervous system to recognize abundance as normal. That sense of normalcy is what removes resistance. What feels natural no longer feels unreachable. What feels natural becomes expected. What is expected is eventually experienced. This is why emotion matters more than effort. You do not manifest through struggle, you manifest through conviction. When your imagined wealth carries the calm authority of certainty rather than the desperation of longing, the subconscious treats it as an active command. Desperation signals lack. Certainty signals possession. The subconscious acts on possession. Over time, this inner shift changes how you move through the world. You begin to notice different opportunities. You speak with greater confidence. You make decisions from expansion rather than fear. You tolerate less limitation. You take different risks. You interpret events differently. And without realizing it, you align your external behavior with your internal identity. The world responds not to what you want, but to who you believe you are. This is the true mechanical link between imagination and outcome. Your imagination reshapes your identity. Your identity reshapes your behavior. Your behavior reshapes your results. The process is seamless and automatic. You are not forcing reality to change. You are becoming the version of yourself for whom the new reality is inevitable. Resistance dissolves when repetition establishes familiarity. At first, imagining wealth may feel unnatural. Your mind may protest with old patterns, doubt, disbelief, logic, memory. That is not failure. That is old conditioning being revealed. Each time you return to your chosen inner image, you loosen the grip of the old identity. The more frequently you occupy the new state, the weaker the old one becomes. Persistence is not about strain, it is about loyalty to your chosen self. Imagination also overrides time. The physical world operates through delay, but the inner world operates instantly. When you experience success internally now, you are no longer waiting for life to give you permission to feel accomplished. You feel accomplished first. That short circuits neediness. It puts you into an energetic position of ownership rather than anticipation. Life tends to reward ownership far faster than longing. This is why those who master this principle often appear lucky to outsiders. In truth, they have simply rehearsed success internally so many times that when opportunity appears, they recognize it immediately. Their mind is already calibrated for expansion. While others hesitate, they move. While others doubt, they decide. And decision is the birthplace of momentum. Your imagination, when properly directed, also dissolves fear at its root. Fear is imagined failure. Anxiety is imagined loss. When you replace those inner pictures with images of strength, provision, and success, you are not suppressing fear. You are displacing it. The mind cannot sustain two dominant realities at once. The one you feed with attention, emotion, and repetition becomes the dominant one. Wealth is not attracted by hoping for change, it is attracted by embodying change. When you consistently feel as one who already lives in freedom, your actions become bolder, your standards rise, and your patience for limitation disappears. You stop negotiating with small results. You stop rationalizing delay. You stop seeing obstacles as final. You begin seeing them as transitional. The outer world will always attempt to reflect back whatever inner world you consistently occupy. If your imagination is trained on lack, you compete for crumbs. If your imagination is trained on abundance, you begin to operate from overflow. The difference is not effort. It is self-concept. Self-concept is drafted entirely in the imagination. To master this is to understand that imagination is not an escape from reality, it is the gateway to shaping it. Every invention, every empire, every breakthrough, every fortune existed first as an inner image held with conviction by someone who refused to surrender it to doubt. The only true barrier between your current results and your next level is the image you continue to accept as yourself. When you vividly experience wealth as fact within, you stop asking if it will happen and start expecting how it will happen. That shift from if to when marks the exact moment imagination begins moving the world accordingly. Emotion is the signal that tells life what is real to you. It is not the intensity of your desire that moves outcomes. It is the depth of your conviction. Many people believe they must constantly feel excited, hyped, or emotionally overwhelmed in order to manifest wealth. In truth, excitement is unstable. It rises fast, but it also collapses quickly. Calm certainty, however, is steady, grounded, and immovable. It is the quiet inner knowing that does not need external proof to remain confident. When you reach that state, you stop trying to force results because internally the result already feels settled. Think about how you feel about things that are already guaranteed in your life. You do not wake up every day overflowing with excitement that the sun will rise, that your name is your name, or that gravity will hold you to the ground. You simply know these things to be true. There is no emotional strain around them. That same emotional neutrality, combined with inner certainty, is the exact state that allows wealth to move toward you naturally. When your mind treats wealth the way it treats certainty, without resistance, without drama, it stops blocking it. The problem for most people is not that they want too little, but that they want with tension. They want with fear. They want with anxiety. They want with the silent belief that it might not happen. That emotional instability becomes the message being transmitted. Life does not respond to what you wish. It responds to what you accept as true. If you emotionally accept struggle as normal, struggle continues. If you emotionally accept abundance as normal, abundance reorganizes itself into your experience. This is why frantic effort often produces limited results, while relaxed confidence produces breakthroughs. When you move from desperation, you are subconsciously declaring that what you want is absent and difficult to reach. That emotional declaration becomes law. When you move from calm certainty, you are declaring that what you want already belongs to you in principle. That declaration shifts everything. Opportunities begin appearing from directions you did not calculate. People offer help without being asked. Timing begins to favor you without explanation. These are not coincidences. They are the effects of emotional alignment. Wealth becomes inevitable when it feels natural. And something only feels natural when it no longer feels like a miracle. Many people secretly treat wealth like a lottery win. Possible, but not probable for them. That emotional framing keeps money at a distance. When wealth becomes emotionally ordinary on the inside, it becomes externally reachable on the outside. You stop being impressed by the idea of money, and instead, you relate to it with familiarity. Familiarity dissolves resistance. This does not mean you become careless or passive. It means your effort is no longer driven by panic. You no longer work to prove your worth. You no longer chase opportunities as if they are scarce. You move with composure, strategy, and clarity. Your decisions become sharper, your timing improves, and your confidence influences the way others respond to you. The emotional state you hold silently educates the world on how to treat you. When you feel convinced, you stop performing belief and start embodying it. There is a noticeable difference. Performance seeks validation. Embodiment expects confirmation. Performance looks for signs. Embodiment creates them. The convinced mind does not ask, will this work? It asks, how do I execute this cleanly? That shift alone separates dreamers from builders. Certainty also restructures your relationship with failure. When you are emotionally convinced of your destination, temporary setbacks lose their power to define you. They become adjustments, not verdicts. You do not interpret delays as rejection. You interpret them as refinement. This emotional stability allows you to persist where others collapse. And persistence fueled by certainty always outlasts talent fueled by emotion. When wealth feels inevitable, your nervous system relaxes. You stop making fear-based choices. You stop underpricing yourself. You stop tolerating environments that drain your growth. You stop shrinking your goals to feel safe. You move with the quiet authority of someone who knows they are building something permanent. That emotional authority is magnetic. People trust it. Markets respond to it. Systems open for it. You were never meant to beg your way into abundance through excitement alone. Excitement burns fast and fades. Conviction burns quietly and infinitely. It is the slow fire that reshapes identity. And once your identity accepts wealth as normal, the struggle is no longer to attract it. The only task left is to allow it. When wealth stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like a decision that has already been made, your entire behavior changes without force. You think differently without strain. You speak differently without rehearsal. You tolerate less nonsense without guilt. You take higher caliber risks without self-sabotage, not because you are trying to become rich, but because you are emotionally aligned with the version of yourself that already is. And that is the real currency, not hope, not hype, not emotional fireworks, but the calm, unshakable inner consensus that your life operates on a higher standard now. When that feeling becomes stable within you, external wealth has no choice but to follow. The world may appear to hesitate, circumstances may seem unmoved, and results may test your patience. But delay is not denial. Delay is simply the echo of old assumptions finishing their final performance. Every outcome you witnessed today was once a quiet belief that felt normal to you. When you choose a new identity and return to it repeatedly, you are not hoping for change. You are installing a new command. At first, the outer world resists only because it is loyal to the past version of you. But loyalty to the old must eventually yield to consistency in the new. Each time you return to your chosen identity, especially when nothing seems to be happening, you are strengthening the signal. The mind is conditioned through repetition. It does not respond to isolated moments of inspiration. It responds to what you repeatedly accept as truth. The first few times you assume the identity of abundance, it may feel artificial. The next few times, it may feel uncertain. Then one day, without ceremony, it begins to feel natural. And the moment it feels natural, it becomes powerful. What once felt like pretense becomes your baseline state. Doubt only survives where focus is inconsistent. Doubt is not a powerful force in itself. It is merely a symptom of divided loyalty. When you return again and again to the same inner conclusion, doubt loses relevance. It has no ground to stand on because certainty no longer requires emotional effort. This is how resistance collapses. Not through struggle, not through argument, but through quiet dominance. The new assumption simply occupies more mental territory than the old one ever did. Most people give up not because the method fails, but because they interpret delay as rejection. They see silence as failure. They mistake the absence of immediate movement as proof that nothing is happening. Yet the most profound changes always occur below the surface first. A seed does not sprout the moment it is planted. Roots form in darkness before life appears in the light. In the same way, your internal repetition builds a foundation that cannot be shaken once it has matured. Repetition is not about forcing emotion. It is about returning to the same conclusion regardless of emotional weather. Some days your certainty will feel strong. Other days it may feel faint. But persistence is not measured by emotional intensity. It is measured by your refusal to abandon the assumption. You do not persist because you feel confident. You persist until confidence becomes automatic. Identity is not formed in moments of clarity alone. It is formed in moments of fatigue, frustration, and apparent failure. Each repetition weakens the authority of the old story. Every time you choose to internally affirm abundance, while the outer world still suggests lack, you are training yourself to source truth internally rather than externally. That shift alone is transformative. The moment you stop asking the world for permission to feel wealthy, you step into a new level of power. The world then has no option but to follow your lead, because it always mirrors the strongest internal command. Resistance often intensifies just before it dissolves. This is not punishment, it is pressure at the breaking point. When old patterns sense displacement, they attempt one last assertion of dominance. Financial stress may spike, delays may multiply, doubt may grow louder. But these are not signs of failure, they are signs of displacement. You are not going backward, you are pushing through the final layer of inertia. Repetition also builds emotional neutrality. At first, your new assumption may feel charged with excitement or fear. Over time, as you persist, it settles into calm expectation. This calm is the most potent state of creation. When wealth no longer feels like a miracle, but like a natural consequence, resistance is already lost. The subconscious accepts only what feels ordinary. Repetition is how extraordinary outcomes become ordinary expectations. The law of persistence is ruthless in its fairness. The identity you revisit most often becomes the one that governs your reality. If you rehearse struggle, struggle becomes your pattern. If you rehearse authority, opportunity becomes your rhythm. The mind does not negotiate outcomes. It enforces habits of thought. This is why long-term consistency always outperforms short-term intensity. You do not need to overpower doubt. You simply need to outlast it. Doubt feeds on attention, not on truth. When you starve it by returning to your decision again and again, it weakens from neglect. Eventually, it stops appearing not because you defeated it, but because it became irrelevant. Persistence also rewires your relationship with time. You stop rushing results and start expecting alignment. You stop watching the clock and start watching your state. This alone accelerates outcomes because urgency implies lack while steadiness implies ownership. When you persist calmly, you move from wanting wealth to authorizing it. The final transformation that repetition brings is self-trust. Each return to your chosen assumption reinforces the message, I am faithful to my decision. That self-trust compounds. Soon, you no longer question whether manifestation works. You question only how long it will take for the echo to complete its return. That shift changes everything. When repetition transforms belief into law, it means your inner conclusion stops being negotiable. You no longer revisit the question of worthiness. You no longer debate whether abundance is possible for you. You simply operate from the expectation that it is your standard. And when something becomes your standard, your whole life reorganizes around enforcing it. Persistence does not beg reality to change. It commands reality to obey through consistency. The world may pause, but it cannot disobey a sustained internal directive. Delay is survivable. Doubt is temporary. But a reinforced assumption becomes permanent. And once it is permanent, wealth no longer feels like a distant destination. It becomes the natural environment of your life. Chasing implies that what you want is outside of you, ahead of you, separated from you by time, effort, or luck. The moment you chase, you silently confess that you do not yet possess the state of the one who already has. Alignment, on the other hand, is the internal agreement with the outcome before it appears. It is the quiet decision that you are already the person who attracts wealth naturally, effortlessly, and consistently. When you align, you stop broadcasting need and start transmitting certainty. And certainty is magnetic. When people chase money, they often live in tension. Every action feels heavy. Every delay feels like rejection. Every obstacle feels personal. This energetic pressure repels the very thing they want because it reinforces the identity of someone who is lacking. Alignment releases that strain completely. It shifts you from forcing outcomes to allowing outcomes. You move from trying to get rich to operating as someone wealth naturally responds to. This shift is not visible to the world at first, but it is seismic beneath the surface, and everything that follows is built on that internal foundation. Alignment begins with identity. You do not align with abundance by wanting it. You align by deciding that abundance is a normal extension of who you are. This means your self-image must change before your bank balance ever does. You stop seeing yourself as someone climbing toward wealth and start seeing yourself as someone who moves through opportunity effortlessly. Decisions become clearer. Risks feel more measured. Confidence becomes stable rather than reactive. This is how embodiment replaces desperation. Desperation is loud, it rushes, it panics, it overworks, it fears being left behind. Alignment is calm. It moves with intention. It selects rather than scrambles. When you are aligned, you no longer feel the need to convince the world of your worth. You expect recognition because you have already granted it to yourself internally. This internal granting is what the world mirrors, back in the form of respect, opportunities, and financial growth. Attraction activates when your internal state and your desired external result are no longer in conflict. If you claim you want abundance, but internally feel unworthy, uncertain, or afraid of losing it, you create friction. That friction slows everything. Alignment removes friction. It simplifies your emotional environment. You begin to feel stable even before circumstances change. And that emotional stability becomes the signal that draws aligned opportunities into your life. When aligned, you also stop over-identifying with short-term outcomes. A delayed result no longer feels like failure, it feels like rearrangement. A setback no longer feels like punishment, it feels like redirection. This emotional neutrality gives you power. You make sharper decisions because fear is no longer steering the wheel. You invest, negotiate, create, and build from clarity rather than urgency. Alignment also cleans up your standards. You stop accepting undervaluation, financially, emotionally, or professionally. You do not demand more from people. You simply stop participating in environments that contradict your self-concept. This shift alone upgrades your income potential dramatically because wealth does not grow in spaces where you tolerate less than you are worth. The moment you stop chasing, your time perception changes as well. You no longer feel late. You no longer feel behind. You no longer feel like you are racing against invisible competitors. You begin to move with pace instead of pressure. Ironically, this is when progress accelerates. Many people move quickly but go nowhere because their movement is fueled by fear. Aligned movement is precise. It compounds. Authority is born here, not loud authority, not aggressive authority, quiet authority, the type that does not need to explain itself. When you are aligned, your presence carries weight. People listen differently. Opportunities present themselves differently. Negotiations feel different because you are no longer negotiating from need. You are selecting from sufficiency. Alignment does not mean you stop working. It means you stop forcing. You still act, but your actions are guided rather than frantic. You move toward opportunities that feel expansive instead of ones that feel like survival. You trust your discernment more because your identity is no longer unstable. When identity stabilizes, behavior gains precision. Another critical shift in alignment is emotional independence from outcomes. When your mood no longer rises and falls with every financial fluctuation, you gain tremendous leverage. You can think long-term. You can endure temporary volatility without panic. This emotional steadiness is one of the most underrated wealth-building traits in existence. When alignment deepens, you also become selective with your mental inputs. You stop feeding your mind stories of scarcity, fear, and collapse. Not because you are avoiding reality, but because you understand that what you repeatedly consume becomes the atmosphere you live inside. And the atmosphere you live inside always predicts your outcomes. At its highest level, alignment becomes self-fulfilling. You begin to expect favorable outcomes naturally. You prepare for success as if it is normal rather than exceptional. You position yourself where opportunity is likely to pass by. You speak with expectancy instead of hope. This expectancy quietly reorganizes your life. Chasing exhausts you because it implies resistance. Alignment energizes you because it implies coherence. One fights the current, the other moves with it. One shouts into the void, the other whispers from certainty. And the world always listens to certainty. The greatest illusion about wealth is that it responds to effort alone. Effort without alignment produces burnout. Effort with alignment produces leverage. The difference is internal, but the result is external in unmistakable ways. When you stop chasing, you stop begging the future for permission to be powerful. You stop asking conditions to validate you. You become grounded where you stand, and from that grounding, momentum grows naturally. Not in frantic spikes, but in consistent elevation. Alignment is the silent multiplier. It does not draw attention to itself, yet it amplifies every decision, every opportunity, every risk, every reward. This is why those who master alignment seem to rise with less visible strain. They are not lucky, they are coherent. And the moment you fully embody this, you realize something profoundly liberating. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are aligned with being. When who you are internally matches what you desire externally, chasing becomes unnecessary. The outcome meets you halfway, and often it meets you faster than you ever expected. What you are living right now is not a verdict on your future. It is a receipt from your past. Every condition, every delay, every breakthrough, and every limitation you see around you is the visible residue of earlier inner decisions, most of which were made unconsciously. The world you are observing today is simply the projection of beliefs once accepted as true. This is why reacting emotionally to current circumstances is one of the greatest traps. When you argue with appearances, you amplify them. When you emotionally submit to what you see, you unknowingly renew the instruction that created it. The environment feels powerful only because you forgot that it took orders first. Most people try to change their life by wrestling with the surface, working harder, forcing outcomes, chasing opportunities, fighting resistance. But surface level effort without inner realignment simply rearranges the furniture in the same room. You may experience short-term movement, but the underlying structure remains intact. True transformation begins when you understand that circumstances are effects, not causes. They are not issuing commands, they are executing them. And the command center has always been within you. The mistake is believing that what you see now is permanent, factual, or authoritative. Is none of those things. It is transitional. It is a lagging indicator. It is delayed compliance. Once you grasp this, you stop panicking when results haven't caught up to your decision. You stop interpreting silence as failure. You stop assuming delay means denial. You begin to move with composure because you know that every visible change requires an invisible incubation period. Nothing shifts instantly in form, but everything shifts instantly in authority the moment the inner instruction changes. Overriding the inner command does not mean denying reality in a foolish way. It means refusing to accept present conditions as the final truth. It means understanding that what appears firm is actually fluid, and what seems stable is only temporarily reinforced by attention. The moment you stop feeding a circumstance with emotional energy, it begins to decay. Attention is maintenance. Emotion is reinforcement. Withdrawal of both initiates collapse, even if the collapse is not immediately visible. When you revise your inner command, you are not trying to force the world to change. You are selecting a new pattern for the world to organize around. The shift is subtle but absolute. The new identity you accept internally becomes a blueprint. Your external environment cannot resist a new blueprint indefinitely because it has no independent intelligence. It reflects, it echoes, it conforms. The only question is whether you will continue giving mixed instructions through doubt, or whether you will stand firm in the new directive long enough for the old one to lose all authority. Most people abandon their revision too early. They change their thinking for a day, maybe a week, and when the outer world does not immediately comply, they conclude that nothing works. In reality, what failed was not the method, but the persistence. Old instructions are stubborn because they were repeated for years. They were etched through emotion, reaffirmed through habit, and validated through repetition. A single moment of insight does not undo years of mental conditioning unless it is followed by disciplined reinforcement. To overwrite an instruction, you must do the opposite of what feels natural at first. When lack appears, you do not emotionally bow to it. When delay speaks, you do not adopt its language. When problems announce themselves, you do not internalize their verdict. You observe them with detachment and continue installing the new assumption as if the outcome were already secure. This is not blind optimism. This is strategic authorship. You are choosing which narrative gets continued and which one quietly ends. The most powerful shift occurs when your reactions change before your results do. The moment you stop reacting as the old version of yourself, the world has already lost its grip on you, even if the physical circumstances have not yet caught up. This is the point of real dominance. You are no longer waiting for proof to feel empowered. You are empowered first, and proof must eventually follow. Every inner command you accept becomes law to your subconscious. It does not evaluate truth. It enforces repetition. It does not argue. It executes. This is why casual self-talk is so dangerous and disciplined self-talk is so transformative. The words you whisper internally today become the conditions you wake up to tomorrow. When you deliberately install new language, new emotional responses, and new identity assumptions, you are not pretending, you are programming. The delay between the new command and its visible manifestation is not punishment. It is a transition. It is the phase where reality is shedding the old skin while preparing the new one. During this phase, everything in you will be tested: your patience, your certainty, your emotional independence. This is where most people unconsciously reverse their progress by returning to old thinking simply because it feels familiar. Familiarity is not truth. It is conditioning. When you stand firm while appearances contradict you, you break the authority of the old pattern. You demonstrate to yourself that you are no longer ruled by what you see. And the moment you stop being ruled by what you see, the world begins reorganizing to match who you have decided to be. This is not mystical, it is structural. Identity drives behavior. Behavior influences decision-making. Decision-making alters opportunity exposure. Opportunity exposure reshapes outcomes. The entire chain starts with identity. Your circumstances are not stubborn, they are obedient. They obey repetition, they obey expectation, they obey emotional consistency. The reason they seem immovable is because most people unknowingly move them in the same direction every single day with their thoughts, reactions, and assumptions. The moment you reverse that daily movement, the trajectory must change. It cannot do otherwise. The true discipline is not in trying to make things happen, but in refusing to let what is happening dictate who you are becoming. The old world will knock. It will try to pull you back into emotional agreement with it. It will remind you of delays, past failures, and visible limitations. And every time you refuse to emotionally bow, you weaken its grip. Eventually, without noise, without drama, without force, the echo changes. One day you wake up and what once felt permanent feels irrelevant. What once felt heavy feels distant. And what once felt impossible now feels obvious. That is the moment you realize the truth. You never fought the world. You simply changed the instructions it was following. Riches respond to decision, not hesitation. The great dividing line between those who merely dream and those who actually live in abundance is not intelligence, talent, timing, or luck. It is decision. A true decision is not a preference, a hope, or a wish. A true decision is an inner command that settles the question of who you are and what you allow. When you decide once and stand firm, you remove negotiation from the process. You stop asking, will it happen? And start living from, this is who I am. That shift alone changes everything. Hesitation is not weakness. It is divided loyalty. It is the silent agreement to remain available for doubt. The moment you hesitate, you leave the door open for fear to renegotiate your future. But when you decide without conditions, without escape routes, without backup plans rooted in insecurity, you create a psychological environment where momentum becomes unavoidable. Life responds to clarity far faster than it responds to effort. When your identity is firm, reality rearranges with speed that surprises even you. To decide once means you no longer test abundance like a visitor. You claim it like a resident. You stop experimenting with belief and begin living from it. You stop checking results every 5 minutes, looking for proof, and instead become proof. The person who is certain does not need reassurance. The person who is certain moves with quiet authority, and authority is magnetic. Standing firm does not mean you will never feel doubt. It means doubt no longer gets a vote. Fear may speak, but it no longer decides. Uncertainty may pass through your mind, but it no longer controls your direction. You stop letting temporary emotions override permanent intention. This is where power is born, not in the absence of fear, but in the refusal to bow to it. Wealth is not persuaded. It does not come because you beg, worry, chase, or overexert yourself in panic. It comes when it is permitted, when your self-concept finally allows it to exist without contradiction. Many people say they want riches, but inside they still see themselves as someone who struggles, someone who must fight for every dollar, someone who is lucky just to get by. That internal identity quietly rejects what the mouth is requesting. Decision corrects that conflict. Once you decide who you are financially, the inner resistance dissolves. Momentum begins at the level of identity, not activity. You can work endlessly without momentum, and you can move lightly with unstoppable results. The difference is not what you do, it is who you are being while you do it. When your identity is settled, your actions become clean, focused, and confident. You stop scattering your energy across 10 fears and start directing it toward one certainty. To stand firm also means you stop arguing with appearances. Outer conditions often reflect your former mindset, not your current decision. If you retreat every time reality shows you an old reflection, you cancel your own command. Firmness is remaining internally loyal when externally nothing seems to be changing yet. This loyalty is not blind optimism, it is disciplined self-leadership. Most people reverse their decisions the moment discomfort shows up. They interpret delay as failure, pressure as warning, and challenge as evidence that their choice was wrong. But discomfort is not contradiction, it is transition. It is the sensation of leaving one identity and stabilizing in another. Those who do not understand this mislabel growth as danger and retreat back into familiar limits. When you decide once, you stop constantly redefining the goal. You stop moving the finish line based on fear. You stop shrinking your vision to match your anxiety. You let the vision command the anxiety instead. This is when confidence becomes natural instead of forced. You no longer try to act bold. You simply are unwavering. Standing firm also purifies your intentions. You no longer seek wealth to prove worth, silence critics, or escape insecurity. You seek it as a natural extension of who you have decided to be. This removes desperation. Desperation repels, certainty attracts. The external world does not mirror what you want most. It mirrors what you tolerate least. When you stop tolerating limitation internally, limitation loses its footing externally. A decided person does not wait for perfect timing because they understand that timing follows identity. They do not wait for permission because their decision is the permission. They do not require consensus because inner certainty outweighs external opinion. This creates a psychological posture that opportunity recognizes instantly. Doors open differently when approached by someone who knows they belong. Standing firm also means you stop rehearsing failure as a safety mechanism. You no longer imagine what could go wrong as protection. You understand the constant anticipation of lost trains, the nervous system for collapse, not expansion. When you decide once, you train your mind to normalize success instead of constantly bracing for disappointment. Your expectations recalibrate. What once felt unrealistic becomes reasonable. What once felt bold becomes standard. Wealth is not a reward for struggle. It is a reflection of congruence when your inner decision and your outer movement operate as one unit. The moment those two are aligned, friction decreases. Resistance dissolves. Energy flows with direction instead of dispersion. The person who stands firm does not become rigid, they become rooted. They can adapt without abandoning themselves. They can pivot without panicking. Their flexibility comes from security, not from fear. This is the difference between strategic change and anxious switching. One is guided by purpose, the other is driven by panic. When you decide once and stand firm, even your failures change meaning. They no longer threaten your identity, they refine your execution. You stop taking setbacks personally and start interpreting them professionally. This emotional maturity is a quiet but massive advantage. Most people quit not because they fail, but because they misinterpret failure as rejection instead of instruction. Reachers respond to decision because decision stabilizes identity. Identity shapes perception. Perception directs behavior. Behavior structures outcomes. The entire chain begins with the moment you decide, without apology, who you are allowed to be. And once that decision is anchored, wealth is no longer something you try to convince life to give you. It becomes something life simply organizes itself around delivering. Stand firm, not with arrogance, but with authority. Not with noise, but with certainty. Not with visible force, but with invisible resolve. Because the world does not change for people who are mostly sure. It changes for those who are decided. You were never meant to beg reality for abundance. You were designed to command it from within. Decide today who you are, think from that position, and let the world rush to confirm it.